advertisers have pulled their ads. Today, the American Heart Association and Home Depot joined the list. And over a week later, we haven't seen one candidate, not one, step up and truly repudiate these attacks. Inappropriate isn't good enough, Speaker Boehner. Not the language I'd use doesn't come close, will it? Where's the outrage? Where's the leadership in the Republican Party? Where's the leadership from the Republican candidates who want to lead this country? Joining me now is Congresswoman Karen Bass, Democrat from California, and Alexandra Petri, the Washington Post editorial writer who rushed attack today, and Tracy McMillan, author of The American War of Eating. She was also attacked by Rush this week. Thanks to all of you for joining me tonight.
Thanks for having us on.
Let me start with you, Congresswoman Bass. Congresswoman Bass, what do you say about the GOP leadership refusing to denounce Rush Limbaugh?
Well, I think it's absolutely inappropriate and absurd. They need to be on the floor. They need to be holding press conferences. They need to say that this type of speech, which in my opinion is hate speech, needs to stop, or he needs to be off the air. I think that this is the type of thing that leads to violence against women. This is International Women's Day, and so the way he acknowledges it is by using the B word in reference to a woman. What I'm very glad about, though, is that there's 50 sponsors that have pulled out. I think there needs to be triple that, and I think the stations need to begin to throw him off the air. That is the only solution to Rush Limbaugh, because he's clearly out of control.
Alexandra, he used the B word in referring to your work, calling it snarky. And I mean, how do you feel on International Women's Day being called and your work being referred to in such a manner by Rush Limbaugh?
I mean, well, it's a weird thing on International Women's Day. I would say it's even a weird thing to be referred to that way on a Thursday. It's not usually how I spend my days. But it's, you know, there's some monosyllables that really pack a punch. I think the B word's one of them. I think the other comment that he used is also, that's a tough word. And, you know, you don't like being called that. It's not a civil way of discussing things. If he had issues with the piece, he could have said that without going ahead and, you know, using the ad hominem, or I guess ad feminem attacks against me. I offered him a sandwich. I reiterate that offer on the air. I think if we get to know people personally as opposed to just using rude words to describe them, maybe things will get better.
Now, Tracy, he attacked you a little more, less profane, but an attack nonetheless. You're an authorette. Let me let you listen to the attack Mr. Limbaugh put on you.
So who's the authorette? It doesn't matter. Now we have a book by a woman named Tracy McMillan, The American Way of Eating, which has, according to the New York Times, as its premise that only the fancy and the snobs get good food. What is it with all of these young, single white women? Overeducated doesn't mean intelligent. For example, Tracy McMillan, the author of this book.
These white women, young, single, overeducated, I mean, what this whole misogynist, this whole using profanity or other characteristics, I mean, I'm more interested and more disturbed and frankly outraged by this sort of anti-woman having their own mind and ability to express themselves attitude that he is openly propagating, that legislators are using that climate to legislate it.
Right. Well, I think what we're seeing here isn't so much an engagement with the ideas of my book, because Limbaugh clearly didn't read it, but I think he's really intimidated by the idea that there are women out there who, you know, go put themselves through school, get an education, and work hard, and go out and do their job, right? So I did a book where I reported by talking to American families about food and class, so it's sort of Michael Pollan and Barbara Ehrenreich in one book, and I did my job, and I don't know why Rush or anybody else would actually really have a problem with the idea that a woman works hard and gets a college education unless they just don't think that women are supposed to do those things.
Now, Congresswoman Bass, Senator Patty Murray took on the Republicans for waging a war against women's health in Congress, too. And I think that what is real troubling, as I just stated, is that this whole climate of misogyny is really being demonstrated in state houses across the country. Let me show you what Senator Murray said.
Sure.
Now, they campaigned across the country in the last election on a platform of jobs and the economy. But the first 3 bills they introduced when they got here were direct attacks on women's health.
How do you respond to that, and how are Democratic lawmakers around the country, including your colleagues in the House, going to deal with these record-setting attacks on women's right to choose, women's right to decide, and women's right to really act as intelligent human beings?
Well, you should certainly know that the Democrats in the House have been very active, speaking out, holding forums and town hall meetings in their community, getting on the air, because this is really a frightening time period. And then from the simple political side of it, you know, who do you think the majority of the voters in this country are? So I think it's really outrageous. And for a party that talks about small government and not government intervention, how can you tell a doctor that they are supposed to do a very specific type of exam on a woman? So now the government is telling doctors what they're supposed to do. It's really absurd. It's as though they want to roll back the clock to the 1930s. They want women to be at home barefoot and pregnant, I suppose. But we know that this is a consistent ideological theme. It's consistent with them trying to attack voting rights. It's consistent with the attacks on the environment. So to attack women, I think this is all part of a right-wing ideological agenda that starts here in the House and goes throughout our country. It's very frightening, but one thing that I'm very clear about, we need 25 seats to take back the House in November, and they better be sure that we're going to make sure the women voters understand what's been taking place here in Washington, D.C.
Alexandra, as these flames are being fanned by Rush and others, is it going to help the Republicans lose those 25 seats? Is there going to be a backlash by women that are not going to, as Congresswoman Bass said, go back to the 30s and be treated less than intelligent human beings that can make their own decisions, that they're not created to be barefoot and pregnant, as she said?
Well, I don't know about that whole thing. I think certainly if you cornered anyone on the street and you said, hey, would you like to go back to the 1930s and wander around barefoot and pregnant, or, you know, the 1880s or whatever time period, most people tend to be opposed to that sort of retrograde time travel, just especially when it comes to sort of sticking strange implements into them. But I don't know. I think one of the things with this whole war on women is that women do come from all kinds of political backgrounds, and just because I happen to be, you know, equipped with a double X chromosome rather than an X and a Y doesn't necessarily predict my voting habits. But when you go in and you start, you know, jabbing strange things and reverting to other time periods, it makes it seem as though that's really the only issue that's happening. There's all kinds of stuff going on. There's the economy. There's, you know, I'm sure if we look out, there's many more issues that women care about. I think Ann Romney said that what women care about is jobs, and instead we're being forced to look at our, you know, uteri. It seems very odd.
Tracy, is this unhealthy to really try and demonize and denigrate educated women that may be pursuing their own life careers? I mean, are we setting a climate here that is really unhealthy for young women in this country to grow up into and find their own self-definition in life?
Well, I think it's unhealthy for anyone, not just young women, right? Like, I feel like education is a real American value, so it's pretty un-American to say that half the population shouldn't bother getting educated. And it would be just as damaging if we said that about, you know, men. And, you know, particularly if we're thinking about Americans, like, being able to compete in a global economy, right? Like, low-wage jobs are really hard, and they don't usually pay well. The easiest way to get out of a low-wage job is to get more education and training, whether that's vocational or going to college. So I think anybody calling for less education, that's a huge problem.
Congresswoman Karen Bass, Alexandra Petri, and Tracy McMillan, thanks to all of you for your time tonight, and thanks for joining me.
Thank you for your work.
Thank you so much.